What's up, everybody? Welcome. We're going to get into politics because everybody worships politics in America. It's part of our religion. Politics and sports hole. Can't wait to see the sweating black man. Sports hole.
What?
I love the sports hole, the sweat. Have you seen the black man sweat in sports hole?
Gay!
I want to cry. Billy Graham wants me to come down to the altar and give my soul to sports hole. If you come down to the football altar and say the football sinner's prayer, why the giant pigskin in the sky will come into your soul and save you. The American religion is sports hole. I love it. I just want to weep right now. Did you know that a lot of what we're seeing with the Podesta Plan and Arctic frost, which has been in the news, which Lord Voldemort has talked about, do you know that a lot of that is kind of old school stuff that's been done for a long time? What am I talking about? Well, let's talk about this first before we get into the neater stuff. So, according to documents released earlier, the FBI and the DOJ weaponized their power against President Trump and the allies of Trump in Operation Arctic Frost, paid for by our taxpayer money. I'm so glad that my IRS, the pound of flesh that they cut from me, is put into also running ops against the ops. And what we found out as well today was that it included Lord Voldemort. People targeted included Bannon, Giuliani, etc. And Lord Voldemort said today he was also included in that. That might also explain why Lord Voldemort is under such legal lawfare. It was recently reported that Biden's FBI and Jack Smith spied on 8 Republican senators during Arctic frost in the investigations into J6. And the reason we're talking about this is because pretty much every party that's in tends to try to utilize the establishment and the intelligence agencies to their own benefit. This should kind of be common sense. I'm not saying that it's good. I'm just saying it's what happens. I think what's crazy is how brazen this was in the last 8 years and just how extreme and intense the psyops were. If you remember, during COOF, they utilized Harvard psychological warfare operatives to basically figure out the best ways to scare the crap out of the public. We learned that at Black Lives Matter meetings, the COOF didn't affect anybody. But if you went to a Trump rally, it would affect you. And 2,000 plus scientists signed a petition that the COOF would not hurt you at a Black Lives Matter rally. This is one of my favorite, all-time favorite headlines because, I mean, there's just so much awesomeness in that headline. And imagine believing that, and probably half of the country does. That's what, every time I start to get a little concerned, like, why are we not growing faster here? I realize because everyone is in an extreme way, and that's okay. And I'm reconciled to that. The other reason I noticed too was that on Instagram, apparently I've been shadow banned, according to the tech support, for 3 years, 4 years, because there was a post 4 years ago of Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer put me in Instagram prison for 4 years. And you don't get told this. It's the Spanish Inquisition shadow banning, and you don't know what you're shadow banned for. So shout out to Jeffrey Badonkadonk, my boy over there. Is he still around? Is he still doing his thing? I don't know what happened to Jeffrey Badonkadonk. He may not be around anymore, but yeah, they weaponized the government against their political opponents. Shocker. But I think, again, this was just so brazen that they would target not just, Trump, but basically anybody remotely conservative. That's what's pretty crazy about this. And they really have no qualms about doing the most underhanded things. Remember, J6 had countless undercover feds and FBI there, admittedly now. We talked about that at the time. I said that I guarantee there were countless feds there. People called me insane when I talked about that years ago, even when it was happening. And lo and behold, we find out once again that is the case. So I know this is kind of like boring political stuff, but the reason I'm bringing it up is that I had a great interview today with Nephilim Death Squad, and we got pretty deep into civil unrest, and they about to turn off my EBT card. Swipe my EBT. Swipe my EBT. Oh, snap. Swipe my EBT. Oh, snap. Get it? Because it's a snap card benefit. Snaps. I've got the power. Snap. When the black man put the ball in the circle and then the points go up, that's called sports hole. That's called sports hole. When the black man sweat and he run in a circle, that's a sports hole. That's a sports hole. That's what I'm on bow right now. Now, you see that, remember when this was mentioned, everybody called anybody in the right or conservative media insane for talking about this, and now it is all admitted. It ties into this. We're going to listen to just a little bit of this, and we're going to analyze and discuss this as we peruse how politics really works.
Single, neatly titled document you can Google in a heartbeat. It's the insidious undercurrent of strategies hatched by John Podesta, the longtime Clinton operative and Obama whisperer, to weaponize division, radicalize the masses, and claw back power through engineered unrest. And at its rotten heart, the Podesta Plan emerges from the WikiLeaks trove of over 50,000 emails hacked from Podesta's Gmail in 2016.
This is a legitimate email. John needs to change his password immediately. So the IT team said, yes, John, reset your password at that bit.ly link. Well, they actually say reset it at myaccount.google.com, which is the right link, but he just went back to the original email and used the bit.ly link, and then he got hacked.
These weren't just chit-chat about pizza parties. They revealed a calculated machine, Podesta, as Hillary's campaign chair and founder of the left-wing think tank Center for American Progress, plotting to plant the seeds of the revolution in America.
Now, remember, they also put this in the New York Times that if Trump ever won a re-election, they would engage in mass civil unrest. Now, the turning off of the EBT cards is, in my view, very much obviously part of that, because the intention is to lead to civil unrest so that when there's a response, they can then play the victim and say, oh, look, it's martial law, it's a crackdown. And whether you believe Trump is playing along with that and part of it, the dialectic or whatever, like that's the plan, right? And it's not just the facts that we see in the WikiLeaks, in the Podesta emails, or the longtime strategies that we've seen with color revolutions. Remember, we've covered color revolution texts for 10 years. I interviewed the preeminent author on color revolutions, F. William Engdahl, in his book Full Spectrum Dominance from 10 years ago. We've interviewed him, and we've talked about this ad nauseum. Of course, people still have no idea what we're talking about. They don't know what this is. But this ties directly into things like the Soros Foundation, Ford Foundation. A lot of what these NGOs, think tanks, and foundations do is what the CIA used to do with regime change and coup operations. Now it's done through these humanitarian covers and fronts. And exactly what they've done in the other countries with the Saffron Revolution, the Green Revolution, the Rose Revolution, the Orange Revolution, these are all real. Now they're going to do the same thing, attempting it here in the US. And I've been saying that it was the Black Lives Matter color revolution a long time ago, but they have to get things to a pressure point, to a, what's the term? The term is a shock to the system, right? That's the actual Alvin Toffler future shock shocks to the system, Tavistock terminology, because the shocks to the system, as the Changing Images of Man text says, that creates a paradigm shift that leads to the new paradigm. And they know precisely where in the system, and by the system, I mean everything in the Western Hemisphere that runs according to the model that we have, post-Bretton Woods economics, technocracy, education, etc. There's specific nodes in this overall system that you can push and destroy the pressure points so that it causes or can trigger massive civil unrest. That was in the Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars document. So remember, one angle that almost no one is talking about with the Charlie Kirk event is the possibility that this was intended to polarize and create extremes. We don't know yet whether it will, but it looks like the extremes are being agitated from especially the Twitter sphere, as I covered multiple times last week when we talk about how Tiny Mustache Man is suddenly everywhere. Oh, it's so hot, it's so sexy. We covered this in depth, by the way, in terms of the occult background and the occult connections to that ethos. The Thule Society, Baron von Sebetendorf, Blavatsky, the root races, all this gibberish, which is part of the occult theorizing behind that whole ethos. That's overlooked. That's basically just dismissed by the postmodern memeing of all of this because, well, he's the savior of Western civilization, supposedly, even though he murdered millions and millions of Christian Slavs, Orthodox Christians, and Poles who fought against him, but they only fought supposedly because they were Bolsheviks, even though we know that that's not true. Many people fought against Tiny Mustache Man who were not Bolsheviks. So why would they do that? Oh, well, they're just lesser, inferior peoples, according to this ridiculous narrative. Now, so you have these high-profile events like Kirk that polarizes and pushes people into extremes. And I mean, that's, I think, possibly what was part of the intention behind this. And that's why so many leftists came out and said, good, we're glad that it happened. And you notice the Black Foundation run preachers, they all hype up the racist, rhetoric as well to polarize. They're doing this on purpose.
Through the leaks, and you see the blueprint solidify, coordinate with media allies to amplify outrage, fund agitators through shadowy foundations, and stoke racial and cultural fault lines to delegitimize elections. It's not about winning votes. It's about winning the narrative war, turning dissent into dynamite.
Reaction to the Trump tape.
Well, my reaction is it's disgusting. And I think people saw in real life what we've been saying for a long time. What Hillary said as far back as June is that he's unfit to be president of the United States.
Ladies and gentlemen, the president-elect of the United States, Donald John Trump.
Coming up with Podesta and leaked chats right after the election, they schemed to paint Trump as an existential threat to minorities and immigrants.
And this is why they immediately started saying, Don Lemon said it, a week ago, it's time to get GUNs and go after ICE, right? So they can openly call for all of this with absolutely no backlash, no repercussions. And that's always been that way because obviously, of course, leftism has political and economic dominance and has for many decades. So they can get away with it. They're allowed to do it. But it's not just for the hell of it. There is a point to all of this. All of these political operatives with all their talking points aligned perfectly on all these issues. They're not saying all of this for the heck of it. They are moving towards an inflection point, and that will be some sort of catalyzing event. I don't know exactly what that'll be, but I can tell you from the way that regime changes are run in other countries that they're going to run a regime change and a coup in this country. I'm not saying that it's only about Donald Trump. So don't oversimplify what I'm saying. It's a lot more complex than that because this regime change, this coup that's happening, it might be 10, 15 years from now, but it will eventually result in the fragmentation and the disintegration of the country. And when that falls, I think they think that the West in general will fall. And we've covered dozens of global elite texts that talk about the disintegration of the country and of the West, and particularly the United States, for all of its flaws and its problems, it's crucial for them to take that down. And they've been writing about that in their text for so long. We saw in Changing Images of Man, they said that in order to change the world, Western civilization, which is far too patriarchal and far too Christian, would have to be deracinated, be destroyed through replacement movements of people groups, etc., open borders, laissez-faire economics and free trade. All of these things, liberal, neoliberal economic theory, are all contributors to things like KELERGI, admittedly accepted by the elites, according to Quigley in Anglo-American establishment, as part of the plan. So this is an overarching long-term plan, and the destruction of the West, even though the America is an Enlightenment nation, it has plenty of flaws. We've critiqued classical liberalism ad infinitum. They still have to remove the notion of rule by law, and that you have, quote, inherent rights, even though it doesn't even make sense why you have rights if you're, say, an atheist, right? They still have to remove the existing boundaries that are still there in terms of the Constitution, which does have a somewhat Christian influence. To do that, you have to utilize all these strategies that they perfected through years of regional conflicts, wars, and regime change coup operations. We've read dozens and dozens of texts over here that deal with CIA regime change operations in other countries and how that's done. And again, it looks like that's exactly what's happening here. It's bigger than Donald Trump. It's not about, oh, you're saying Donald Trump is going to save. I'm not saying that. It's way bigger than just one guy, because it's not really about the presidency. It's about the networks that are in the background, that are the steering committees, the think tanks, the foundations that work at the behest of the extremely wealthy people who want to change not just the West, but also the world.
Priming blue cities for secession and street-level sabotage.
Trump is a criminal. Criminals like to be around other criminals.
And a mob boss.
Yeah.
Podesta's fingerprints are everywhere. From emails coordinating with CNN's Donna Brazil to rig town halls to whispers of pressuring donors like Saudi Arabia and Qatar over ISIS funding while ignoring Clinton Foundation ties.
But most scandalous is that one of the biggest donors to the supposedly progressive team is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, currently massacring dissidents in its own country, as well as thousands of Yemeni civilians. The Saudi regime funds the Clintons with at least tens of millions of dollars. And in 2015, the Saudi government also started paying $140,000 per month to the Podesta.
Now, it's not inconsistent to talk about the Saudi. You won't talk about Zionism and the Jews because you won't talk about Zionism. They're on the same team. Saudi Arabia and Israel are not against each other. They are allies. And they're both allies with the West and with the Western intelligence apparatus and superstructure. So British intelligence and the CIA are not at odds with the Saudi Arabian intelligence goons and Israeli intelligence operatives. They work together because they're part of the Western alliance, etc. So they do, however, in terms of the Saudis, as we said from the Blumenthal book, they have been one of the chief promoters of Islam in America and in the West. Billions of dollars put into building mosques, Islamic education centers all across the U.S. in the last 20, 30 years. So when you drive around and you see mosques everywhere, that's a lot of Saudi money. That's a lot of, that's not antithetical to Israel's interest, because Israel has no problem with Islam being the broom of Israel. That's what is popularly called, and that's absolutely accurate.
Group.
Now, zoom to today, and the Podesta Plan isn't theory, it's fully operational. With Trump back in the saddle and the deep state reeling, sources are buzzing about a Podesta-led Democrat plan for 1,500 protests across all 50 states, scripted riots in LA, and false flags to frame Trump as a dictator, all to ignite a civil war scenario and seize power. Podesta is not just advising on climate scams like the Inflation Reduction Act's $370 billion green slush fund.
As Karine noted, we're marking the one-year anniversary of a truly transformative piece of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest investment in clean energy and climate action ever in the United States in the history.
All scams, all criminals. So that's actually how the country is run, by a bunch of like hardcore criminals and organized crime syndicates. But remember, don't forget, the the other things about hot dogs in those emails, by the way.
Of the world. But first, I want to acknowledge that today's event is coming during a time of heartbreak as the toll of extreme weather fueled by climate change is being felt across the country and the world.
Now we're just having to get the money out as fast as possible before they come in and stop it. It truly feels like we're on the Titanic and we're throwing gold bars off the hatch.
He's the architect of the unrest that keeps the masses distracted while the elite consolidate. This is the Podesta Plan.
So when we talk about this, what we're talking about is a lot of what was in his emails, and then again what they put in the New York Times. If Trump was elected again, that they would be able to call for this disintegration of the country and this uprising. Whether or not that's actually going to occur in the Trump reign, we don't know. It might take 5-10 years, but that's another reason why so many people were imported. And I think you can figure out, add it up. You could put 2 and 2 together. We have a smart audience, right? It's not too hard to figure out why they do this. And that's where we are. That's why they can get away with this.
An orchestrated uprising, riding out into this very day.
Now, there's a lot of information, too, on how the CIA conducted regime changes in other countries. You go back to the podcast that we did on the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran in the early 1950s, Operation Ajax, and how Kermit Roosevelt almost didn't succeed in that operation, but they had to get into rigging the election. And they were very successful in initially testing out and experimenting with that in that coup. And then later in many other countries, they perfect the technique of how to have elections and have them have the appearance of, really democratically chosen candidates and whatnot. But really they were, the ballots were stuffed, et cetera. There's a lot of different techniques as to how they can do this. But that's part of the stagecraft. That's part of the operation, is to give the impression that there are validly elected leaders. But oftentimes what happens is the leaders that are coming to power are either Western or foreign puppets, right? So they're, like in the Ukraine, for example, you would have leaders who were either pro-Putin and sort of in the Russian sphere of influence, or you would have leaders who were on the Western side of influence, such as Zelensky. And the situation with Ukraine actually goes back to the 80s and 90s, and it was George Soros that really put the initial money into that first round of the Orange Revolution propaganda. Again, color revolution strategy is perfected by Gene Sharp and the Einstein Institute, and it's what F. William Engdahl has been writing about for 10 years. We've covered these books for 10 years. So nobody really listens to this stuff, to this meta-level political stuff. They don't understand it's the same operations run in the other countries. We talk about it ad nauseum, and then people fall back into all the same, two-party scam system stuff. Now, the papacy is also a part of this, and we've hammered this home ad infinitum, and no one on the Roman Catholic side wants to admit this. They all just ignore this. But this is precisely why he's an agent of internationalism as well. Pope Leo, continuing all the same statements of Francis, says it's time to break down borders. Borders and security zones are what separate us from our neighbors. He says this all the time, showing that he is an agent of internationalism, as we have said for at least, I don't know. I mean, even when I was a Catholic, I was a trad cat. I knew all these goblins were agents of internationalism. And then today, in terms of the regime change and coup operations in Venezuela, and again, this is very nuanced. We've done podcasts with Tristan in the past where to understand Latin and South American politics is super intricate. It's actually not that easy to understand, because you have these socialists that will try to nationalize the resources, and then you have the economic vultures, the neoliberals coming out of the CIA in Washington, the Pentagon, who want access to the resources, and they want corporate control. And both of those are competing bad systems. So really the only way that there's a counterbalance to the neoliberal CIA approach in these countries is the socialist response. And the socialist response is still, even though there might be sincere people, and you might have a dictator who does the nationalization of some industry like oil for the benefit of his people, it's actually still a control scam system as well. So there's not an easy answer to any of these operations between the CIA and the socialist countries. But you'll notice This was pretty wild. CIA-linked group allegedly captured in Venezuela. Venezuela is claiming that they caught a bunch of the CIA operatives that were about to engage in a fake flag event. Again, who knows how legit this is. It's just fascinating that the way that the regime change is going to be run there, it's going to be no different than all of the other regime change operations, because it's like a technique or a technology. It's a strategy. I did an interview with the Russian geopolitical analyst Andrew Karibko many years ago, and he talked about the skeleton key that Al Qaeda or ISIS is. ISIS goes into a region, and like a skeleton key, they unlock the chaos so that you can later have the pipeline or the access to the resources. And if you don't understand that it's all about control of the resources, then you really understand nothing about geopolitics. One of the key points in Ingdahl's book, Full Spectrum Dominance, is that the color revolutions really prepared the way for the pipelines. The Eurasian pipeline wars, the unspoken agenda of Washington's aggressive Central Asian policies after the collapse of the Soviet Union, can be summed up in a single phrase: the control of energy. As long as Russia was able to use its strategic trump card, not Donald Trump, not my card, probably a beautiful card, probably like this card, but not my card. Oil and gas reserves, etc., from Western Europe and China, it could not be politically isolated. The location of various color revolutions was aimed directly at encircling Russia and cutting off at any time export pipelines. And this was done via NATO and CIA operations throughout the 1980s and 90s. If you remember, there was a great quote. Let's see if we can find, what's that quote by Soros where he says, "Oh, it's my project." Here you go.
Major effort. My first one was in South Africa, but afterwards, Eastern Europe, when the Soviet Union, the Soviet Empire collapsed, and as the empire collapsed, I moved in and picked up the pieces. First in Hungary in 1984.
He's talking about color revolutions.
In 87. China in 87 as well. So this is how the Soros Empire was replacing the Soviet Empire.
And how do you think you're doing in your imperial ambitions?
Well, as you can see, you take Russia, which is actually where I'm most involved currently, and it's a replay, but of what we went through at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But unfortunately, the big difference is that then you had a moribund Soviet Union, and you had an emerging European Union. It was the height of the European Union, the integration. And now you have the reverse. You have a resurgent Russia, and unfortunately a disintegrating European Union. And that's a very sad development. But I think the foundation has made a contribution, so I consider it a success to be involved. And particularly because my main involvement actually in Ukraine, where there is a new Ukraine, which is eager to be part of the European Union and be a European democratic country. Actually, the people involved, almost every one of them, had been somehow in contact with the foundation. So it's both inside government and civil society, it's all people who
So
meet and
there you have
they
it.
tell me.
Ukraine Revolution, Orange Revolution, funded with Soros money, funded with Soros Foundation, National Endowment for Democracy type funds, all admitted, all stated right there. And by the way, that was working together with the CIA under the Reagan administration. It was under Reagan that a lot of the former CIA type ops were privatized and put into foundation NGO cover.